Okay, so good morning, everybody. Welcome to our asynchronous session in tourism policy planning and development. So, welcome to week three, and for this week, based on our core syllabus, sorry, we will be covering chapter two, okay, of our discussions, which would be tourism planning process. Okay, so for this specific chapter, we will be focusing on the different learning objectives, such as number one, to recognize the different models of planning. So we are going to tackle the different types of different models. No, there will be, um, sorry, frameworks about uh, tourism planning that we're going to discuss in this particular session. Okay, so medyo marami to, and we have to have a good grasp on these different types of planning models. Okay. Sorry. We also have to recall the different tools and data needed for tourism planning. So what are your relevant data that we will be gathering in order for us to at least get a certain idea of how do we create our plans. And then also, sorry, the different major elements of tourism planning development plan. Okay. Sorry, medyo inubo ako ngayon. Okay? Uh, because of the change of weather, I guess. Okay. Anyways, identify the special features of ecotourism planning process. There will be a special topic about ecotourism planning here. It's just basically a review. If you can still remember the preliminary site assessment and full site evaluation that we have discussed during your second year, babalikan lang natin to dito. There's also the evaluate. We will also evaluate tourism resources and tourism sites according to established criteria. We make projections for the supply of rooms by because like what I have said, accommodation is a very integral part in terms of gathering data. Okay, and apart from that, the hotel sector and the accommodation sector also provides us relevant data towards projection for our future plans. And lastly is to enumerate sorry the components of tourism development plan digest. Okay, so let's now start with our discussion. Pardon. Okay. So let's start with the different planning models. Okay. So this is basically a review on some sort of your topics in terms of strategic management, if you can still remember, or sometime or it might be discussed with you during your senior high school years in um, what's this in um, management and organization. No? So we commonly discuss the different planning models on that area. So let's start first with Patrick Gidd's basic planning model. So in terms of the concept of Gidd's, no, basically the focus are just the three main areas in terms of planning. So the first step, okay, it's basically a straight line process in which we survey, we analyze, and we plan. Okay? In order for a plan to exist, there must be data that will be gathered. And that data will be gathered through the methodology of survey. Okay? Um, sorry. So, just like what you have done in your research during your quantitative analysis, you have, before you do your quantitative analysis, you first gather your data. Okay? Through a certain instrument, which we also known as a survey. Okay, and then after we have gathered the data, we tend to analyze things. Okay, how do we analyze things? We try to integrate the current situation, the current implications on the current situation with the numbers that we have gathered. Okay, and then from there we make our recommendations, and those recommendations are actually your plan of actions. Okay, so in terms of focusing on the basic planning model, it's just a no-brainer and a straight no nonsense process from surveying, analyzing, and planning. It was actually augmented by Hall in 1975, at which instead of saying just survey, it was changed into gather data and information. Why? Because data can be interpreted or can be gathered not just on a quantitative level but also on qualitatives or narratives, 'di ba? Kaya nga yung iba sa inyo, no, you have utilized mixed methods, or some of you have done pure qualitative researches, because information are gathered as qualitative data. Okay? And then after that, it was analyzed. Okay? From the analysis, from step 2 of Patrick Gids, it was changed into the analysis of data collected and detecting trends. So according to Hall, we also have to detect trends. In terms of analysis, we don't just focus on the current situation, but we also focus on the historical data. Okay? Because the historical data tells us what is the future outlook, or what would be the future looks like. It depends on the trends. Okay? So that's how we do in forecasting. And forecasting is basically part of your planning process. And lastly, nag-agree na sila doon, make a plan. Okay? So the action of making the plan is actually derived from gathering the data and analyzing data and trends. Okay, so that's the two basic concepts, or basically that's the basic planning model as argued, or as proposed by Gibbs, and it was argued by Hall in 1975. Okay, in 1969 also, there is what we call as the systematic planning process. So the systematic planning process consists of 6 um, interrelated steps, and these steps are forming on a cycle. Okay, it basically cyclical in nature. Unlike on the other presentation, it's just basically a straightforward process. But in this time, everything goes back to step 1. Okay, it's a cyclical process. So we basically start by deciding to plan. Okay, so a plan won't exist. Sabi ni Patrick Gids, a plan won't exist without the data. But according to McLaughlin, his belief is that a plan would only exist if the planner decides to plan. Okay? Or meron siyang willingness to conduct the planning. Okay? In terms of management prerogatives, in terms of tourism development, diba? And tourism planning, a tourism plan won't exist without a certain interest of this tourism planners to conduct a plan, to organize things, to make to implement changes, and to at least monitor and evaluate future developments of the tourism industry. Okay, so it starts with the decision to make your plan. After you decide that you will be doing a plan, you set your objectives and goals. Okay, and then once you are actually setting your objectives and goals, you will now study the courses of action, or what we call as your ACAs, or alternative courses. Okay? What would be my courses of action in order for me to attain this uh, goal or objective? And then after that, these alternative courses of action should be evaluated based on different tawag dito, criteria. Eh, kagaya ng ginagawa natin sa case studies, 'di ba? If you're doing your case studies right during your second and third year, um, we tend to set criteria in order for us to evaluate, okay? In order for us to evaluate our um, what's this? Our courses of action, and we look into what's the best alternative course of action to be utilized for your plan. Okay? And that leads us to number 5. We choose our course of action based on the results of our evaluation. And then that course of action will be implemented. And number 6, we monitor the results of those alternative courses. Okay? So basically, the concept of Brian McLaughlin in 1969 is the case-based method of planning. So like what we are doing in our case analysis, ito yung ina-adapt nating format, no? We set objectives, we understand, or we at least craft our courses of actions, at least 3 courses of actions. We evaluate them based on a certain criteria, and then by the results of the criteria, we choose that alternative course of action and implement it and create a monitoring. Okay? So yun po. Next, according to Hudson and Liu, okay? There is what we call as the rational planning model. So rational planning model involves involves 10 steps, no? Actually, in terms of understanding uh, planning in a manner that um, planning should be considered as a rational way of thinking. Okay? So when I say rational way of thinking, it's basically a process flow of your intellect and cognitive skills together with your psychomotor and your psychosocial skills. Okay? So in terms of a rational planning model, the 10 steps are as follows. Number one, you identify the problem of your location. And majority, by the way, of rational planning model, okay, majority of the urban planners and tourism developers are actually focused on this kind of planning model. Okay, they anchor their planning, their studies, and plan of actions in rational planning model. But there are some arguments that we can actually augment and change and improve on this one. So later on, we're going to look on those arguments, no? Particularly the concept of the track-wise models, etc., etc. Okay, so number one, we identify the problem. So like in your research before, diba? There's no problem. A solution won't exist if there's no problem. And problems are meant to be solved. Therefore, in terms of planning, we first identify what would be our problem. Bakit nga ba tayo magko-conduct ng isang tourism plan? Okay? And then, after we identify our problems, we set our goals. Okay? What will be the goals of this plan? What will be the end of this plan? Okay? What is the end in mind? Ika nga natin, di ba? And then, just like what we say in management, di ba? Begin with the end in mind. So, before you start everything, you start by seeing an expectation on what's going to end. Diba? And then number three, you collect your background data. So background data, yan yung kumbaga RRL natin. No? So in terms of tourism planning, there's still RRLs. You still have to write and cite people who have made who can make the rationale of your plan more tawag dito factual. Okay? After you gather the background data, you identify the guidelines for assessing alternatives. Okay, so you basically just like in what's this based on the systematic planning model of McLaughlin. It's just basically step number 4, the evaluation of the courses of action, or what we call as basically cost benefit analysis. So we set the guidelines. Okay, what would be my criteria? Okay, and then, after you set your criteria, ito yung pinagkaiba nila. So, dun sa case-based model ng systematic planning process, nauna ang alternatives or nauna kang mag-develop ng alternatives bago ka magkaroon ng uh, guidelines. Okay? But this time, it's the other way around. Okay? So, kailangan may guidelines muna bago ka mag-develop ng alternatives. Okay? What's the positive side of this? The positive side of doing the rational planning model is you set your evaluation criteria first before you do your alternative courses of action. Mainly because if you have your criteria, your alternative courses of action will at least not take sides. Okay? Unlike if you're doing cases, di ba? For doing case studies, and then we develop our alternatives, tapos feeling mo yung aakawan yung pinakatama, you adjust your criteria para maging tama or para maging panalo yung number 1. So that's wrong. Okay, that's a wrong. Hindi man that's a wrong way of doing it. But most of the time, if we're actually adopting that, we try to take sides in terms of our alternative courses of action. But if we do it the other way around, like setting the guidelines first before we do the alternative plans, the tendency is that when you create your alternative plans, you make sure that the alternative plans are aligned with all of the criterias. So, kumbaga balanse. Balanse ang atake natin, no, in terms of rational planning model. And then afterwards, we assess. Okay? So we create the guidelines, we create the plans, and we create the action plans, and then we assess them. Yun yung kumbaga sinandwich nila, no, sa rational planning model. And then after you assess your plan, that's the time that you select the preferred alternative. Okay? Once you have selected your alternative, that's the time that you also implement the plan. Okay? And then you monitor and evaluate. Okay? And what's good about the rational planning model is that uh, planners has this open-mindedness na the opportunities of identifying a new problem will spur out coming from the evaluation of the current plan. 'Di ba sabi ko nga sa research dati, a valuable research always pose a challenge for the future researchers. Ika nga natin, when you write your recommendations, you also recommend on the future researchers, not just because you want them to conduct, further studies, but you also give them an advice on what would be the next problem of that study. Same goes with planning. In planning, when you evaluate and monitor your implemented plan, the areas for improvement will actually identify the new problem. And it goes back to the beginning of the process. Okay? That is why most of the urban planners, most of the tourism planners, no, are actually in line with the rational planning model because uh, we all know that solutions bears another set of problems, and these problems are meant to be solved and over again, because if there's no problem and there's no problem, there's basically no solution, there's no development. Okay, yun yung normal paradigm, no, ng tourism planners natin. Okay. Well, another planning model that we can also use is the VICE planning model. VICE stands for Visitors, Industry, Communities, and Environment. So this basically focuses on the central role of the Trek VICE model is the consultation of the stakeholders. Okay? So basically, we consult our stakeholders in terms of our plans. So, needless to say, we can augment the rational planning model or the systematic planning model or whatever you want from those two with the VICE model. Why? Because whatever implementations that you will be doing in a community or in a certain area for tourism development, you have to always consult your visitors, your industry, your community, and also basically concerning about the environment. Okay? Why is it important for us to consult these people and these stakeholders? Number one, is to provide information for them. Di ba? We inform them na pasintabi po, meron po kaming development na gagawin. Di ba? Well, it's a sign of respect as well in terms of doing consultations, right? And then second is to encourage stakeholders to present their views. Okay, so we get to ask them we try to give them a chance on how they view our plans. Okay, is it beneficial on their end or what are their areas of concerns? Okay, and that basically helps us improve in terms of our planning styles. Okay, then to explain the scope of consultation for stakeholders. We try to identify what would be the limits of our plan. Okay? So, ito lang pong area na itong i-develop namin. Outside this, hindi na po namin yan sagot. Ito lang po yung kukuhanan natin. Hanggang dito lang po. This will be the participants of our plan. So, it is also clear to them on what's your scope and what are the limitations of your plan. And lastly, to give reasons for decisions by local authorities to proceed or cancel a tourism project. So, it is also important that you consult whatever decisions of the local authorities to these people na as mga ma'am, sir, especially if you're doing indigenous developments on indigenous communities na syempre, apo, pasensya na po, it was actually approved by the local government. Kung meron po tayong concerns, 'di ba? Let's pag-usapan po natin ngayon. Ganyan, ganyan. Okay, or kung bakit na-cancel ang isang project, you also have to inform these people. Okay? So, napakahalaga po ng consultation or what we call as basically the consultation on the vice stakeholders of plan. Okay? So basically, there are different components of strategic planning. We already know about this one. We have discussed this on the first week, di ba? The vision, goals, objectives, and the strategies itself. Now, let's focus on the next planning model. This is basically a local-based planning model in terms of the development of the National Tourism Development Plan, or our NTDP. Okay, so as what we all know, then NTDP is a comprehensive 5-year plan. Okay, um, which basically helped us in towards understanding how we move further as a national as a tourism industry of national scope. Okay, and basically the methods that they are actually using are as follows. We have the situation analysis, which means to say understanding the present situation of the tourism industry as well as the historical backgrounds. Second, syempre setting goals, visions, and uh, strategies. Third is the action plans that you will be doing. And in terms of NTDP model, there are several number of plans. You don't just focus on one major plan, but rather you're going to refer to the PDF file that I have gave you. There are numerous types of plans inside there. There's a plan for transportation, a plan for ecotourism, a plan for MICE, okay, a plan for human capital management, etc., etc. Promotions, yan. So, may kanya-kanyang segregation. Apart from that, there is a budget estimate. Why is it important that there's a budget estimate? Take note that the National Tourism Development Plan model is derived on a public sectoral level. Meaning to say, national budgets are actually allotted for these projects. And we have to look into understanding what are the different estimates or what are the different possible expenses that you're going to incur when you develop a certain tourism area. Okay? And lastly, is the identification of your implementation mechanisms, or basically focusing on your destination management framework. How would you at least identify the management of a certain tourism area? What would be the focus on that specific spatial unit of plans? Okay, so that could be referred to in our NTDP documents. No, well, actually, there are some few more, such as the UNWTO model. So in the UNWTO model, you start with the study preparations. Okay, so in a global scope, the study preparation took years. Okay, hindi lang yan basta isang pitik ng mata natin at saka kumbaga isang bagsakan na okay, I need this data. It would take a lot of time in gathering uh, multi-country or multinational plans, no, such as the UNWTO model. So it starts with study preparations and then creating a background research for the plan, setting the objectives and setting the strategies, report writing and presentation, which includes a lot of readings and rereadings and revisions of the plan before they implement and monitor it. Okay? So, mas mahaba ang proseso if you are actually doing a UNWTO model. And normally, it's for the global and multi-national types of planning for tourism. Okay? So, next week, on Friday rather, we will be seeing each other for our synchronous session. And for that day, we will be tackling a review for the ecotourism plans as well as the other future discussions for this specific topic. Okay. At the end of this session, I will be opening the assessment I will be opening the activity for today, and that involves your National Tourism Development Plan. Okay, so I believe I have given this since summer. Okay, so you have at least read the contents of the National Tourism Development Plan so you can be able to answer my questions in the activity. Okay, so that's all for me. Thank you very much. I mean, if you still need some references, the NTDP is actually uploaded on our Google Classroom. Okay, so you have to submit your activity before the end of my class hour. okay, for your attendance and for your recitation for today. Okay, so thank you very much and have a great day. Bye bye.